Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Holly Ravensloot. I am the branch chief for the Energy Policy and Evaluation Branch for the Office of Community Services Division of Energy Assistance. That is a mouthful. On behalf of OCS, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar on reminders for completing the fiscal year 2018 household report. Today's webinar will have two presenters, Melissa Torgerson of Verve Associates and Dan Bausch of APPRISE. Today's webinar has three purposes. First, the webinar will provide a brief refresher on the requirements for the household report long form, which state grantees and select territory grantees are required to complete, as you all know. Second, this webinar will update you about the status of the FY18 household report and expected due date. Finally, the webinar will discuss key things to remember and keep in mind to avoid common reporting issues. The audience for this webinar are LIHEAP coordinators who have previously completed the household report long form and any staff who assisted with completing it. Today's webinar is the first of three webinars we are offering on completing the FY18 household report. The next webinar is planned for November and will provide a detailed line-by-line overview of the household report. That webinar is actually intended for new coordinators and staff, or for anyone interested in a more in-depth review of the actual instructions. The third webinar is planned for December. That webinar will provide a brief 30-minute review of the requirements and nuances. You will receive information to register for each of these webinars in the coming weeks. Our hope is that these training opportunities are helpful and valuable as you work to complete your final report. Thank you for your time and joining us today, and I'm going to hand it over to Melissa. But I will remain on if y'all have any questions.
Thanks, Holly. So today we're going to have a 30-minute webinar, and we're going to take this time, as Holly said, to talk through some final or some considerations as you are either getting started or continuing work on your household report. The slides are available for download now under the handout section of the GoToWebinar sidebar. So if you have your sidebar open, you'll see a handout there. It's a PDF, and you can download these slides. Just so you all know, the webinar is being recorded and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. If you have a question, we're going to do things a little bit differently this time. We're going to have you type in your questions into the GoToWebinar question box. That's also in your sidebar, and then APPRISE will go ahead and review those questions and will respond to those questions that are relevant to the entire network of grantees. We'll do that here in the webinar, and for those of you who have more individualized questions, we'll follow up in an email. And so this is what that question box looks like, and you can expand the sidebar if it's not open by that clicking on that little orange arrow. So we've talked about this before in the past, but the household report is not new. So some of you who have been around since the beginning of LIHEAP have been submitting this report or a version of this report since the 1980s. And what it allows OCS to do is to report consistent information to Congress about basic LIHEAP outcomes as required by the statute. For those of you who are interested in looking at your past data, these data are all reported and compiled in the LIHEAP report to Congress each year. And these reports to Congress, as well as all of the data, are published in the LIHEAP data warehouse. The requirement of the statute is that all of you must submit preliminary data in September as part of your LIHEAP model plan. So many of you submitted a version of the household report with your model plan, but these data can be estimates, and so grantees are required to submit final non-estimated data by the specified due date, which is usually in December.
Hi, everyone. This is Dan Bausch. As Holly mentioned in the beginning, one of the purposes of today's webinar is to give you an update on the status of the fiscal year 2018 household report. As you may know, federal agencies have to receive approval by the Office of Management and Budget for data collections like the household report. And right now, the current household report form is expiring on October 31st. So OCS initiated the process of requesting renewal of the form from the Office of Management and Budget, and they are currently reviewing the request to renew the household report for 3 more years. OMB is expected to approve the household report in December, and then once that approval is granted, OCS is going to publish an action transmittal that alerts you to the final due date and provides the instructions for accessing and submitting the form in OLDC. Right now, the form is available in OLDC, and once the current form expires on October 31st, you won't be able to go in and certify and submit the form with final data until the form is renewed. But grantees are encouraged to prepare their final data for submission in anticipation of that final due date. So we encourage you to do that. So an important question that always comes up is what's changed from last year with the household report? And we wanted to alert you that there are no changes to the 2018 household report and that the requirements remain the same as those for last year's fiscal year 2017 report. That means you can review last year's instructions for reporting each item in the household report. You can see the link there, and if you have any trouble finding it, you can reach out to us. And we also encourage you to look back at any communications you received about your report last year and any issues that were identified, so that you can remind yourself of them and make sure to address them again as you prepare your 2018 report. Now we're going to turn to some reminders of the reporting rules for the household report.
So we know that LIHEAP is a block grant, and all of you have freedom to kind of design unique and diverse programs. But the purpose of these reports is, as I mentioned earlier, so that OCS can report consistent information to Congress, even if all of our programs are different. And so it's very important that you review the instructions on how to correctly report each item and to contact your liaison when encountering challenges in reporting according to the instructions. So we have some examples here that we sometimes get, especially if you're new. There are several grantees who have a program year that's different from the federal fiscal year. For example, some run January to December, some run June to June, or June to July. And so what's important is that the data you're turning in must be based on the federal fiscal year from October 1 to September 30. And that can be a challenge. APPRISE can help you with that if you're having issues getting data out of your system, but it's very important that you're reporting on the federal fiscal year and not your program year. Grantees also may have reporting systems that are designed to report individual benefits provided. However, the household report, as it's named, is based on households. And so once again, if you're collecting information regarding individuals, you can reach out to your liaison or us at APPRISE, and we'll help you figure out how to be reporting data in terms of households.
The household report is a standardized report, and it asks you to report information in defined categories. But as each of you know, your programs are unique, and there may be specific features and nuances that aren't captured in those categories. So one important reporting rule for the household report is to explain any features that are unique or any information that's out of the ordinary in the notes section. The notes section's on the bottom of the report, and it really is very valuable because it allows you to tell OCS information about your report. If you receive a warning in OLDC telling you there might be a possible error or issue, and you check it and realize that the information is correct, the note allows you to explain that. And it also allows you to put in information that can be used in the tables and the footnotes in the annual report to Congress to provide more context about your program. So we encourage you to use those notes. And here's two examples. The first one is you might be a grantee filling out your report, and you have the same number of households served with heating assistance and the same exact number of households served with any type of LIHEAP assistance. The reason is because you may provide heating assistance prior to other types of assistance. So everybody who gets crisis assistance needs to first have heating assistance, for example. So for the household report, that would be something to indicate in a note to help with understanding why those two numbers are the same. And then the second example is if you're filling out your report in OLDC and you go to validate it and receive a warning message related to your cooling assistance counts, and the warning message says that they are substantially different from last year. If you look at the data and confirm it's correct, that would be a good example of something you should put in the notes, explaining that you saw the error and investigated it, and providing any useful information to help with understanding that.
So the household report requires grantees to report using the information you have, and some of you have systems that are counting different things, or you may have multiple systems, but you need to use your data reporting system to identify and count these households. We do provide data validation and checks to assist grantees with reporting, and those of you who have done this before know that you will get warning and error messages in OLDC that kind of highlight things you should look at again and double check. And then in addition to the checks in OLDC, APPRISE also runs additional validations to look at whether the numbers make sense, when you compare them to one another and so on. So there's multiple steps in terms of us looking at your data and the chance to correct it if it's wrong, and then APPRISE will follow up with you if they see anything as well. So now we'll talk about some of those validation and checks so that you can kind of prepare yourself as you complete your report. There are both warning messages and fatal error messages. And so whenever something doesn't check out for whatever reason in OLDC, you'll get one of these two messages. Now, warning messages indicate that the data may be correct, but they require you to double check it. So the examples that Dan gave before, for example, would produce warning messages, in which case you would go into the note section and explain that, yes, this is correct, and here's why it's this way and why we're bypassing the warning. When you get a fail error message, it has to be corrected before you're able to submit your household report. So these are things that just are, either arithmetically impossible or don't make any sense and require you to make a change to that. And if you feel like you've gotten a fatal error message in error, or you feel like the data is absolutely right and you're not sure why you're getting it, that's a good time to pick up the phone and call your liaison or APPRISE, and we'll walk you through it. Oh, and here I jumped ahead of myself. If a warning message appears and you have an explanation and you've confirmed that the data is correct, add a note addressing the warning. This will keep you from getting a phone call from APPRISE. And once again, if a warning message or a fatal error message pops up on OLDC and you're just not quite sure either what it means or how to resolve it, you can give us a call at APPRISE and we'll help walk you through that.
So once you submit your household report, APPRISE does conduct a review of the household report where we do additional checks to see if there are any issues or any questions to raise. So on this slide, you'll see there's 3 different types of checks that are done to your household report, either in OLDC or or later by APPRISE. The first type of checks are internal consistency checks within the report itself. So the report asks you for different counts, looking at different categories, and some of them are subcategories within a category. So we'll do checks to see if the data are consistent. An example is you're asked to report the total number of households that received each type of assistance that you provide. And you're also asked to report those households broken down into poverty intervals. So one of the checks we do is we check to see if the count of households across those poverty intervals adds up to the total amount you reported elsewhere in the report. The second type of checks that are done to your report are comparing it against your model plan. So in this case, the fiscal year 2018 household report, we compare against your fiscal 2018 model plan. An example is we look to see if in your household report you report households being served for each type of assistance that you indicated in your model plan you were planning to provide. And then the third type of checks that we do are comparing your household report against the prior year's household report. An example is we look at the counts for each type of assistance and see if there are any dramatic changes in the number of households that were served with that type of assistance. Okay, so once you submit your report, the process goes like this. First, APPRISE will review your report and we'll conduct those validation checks. And if we see any potential issues or we have any questions, we will send you an email to ask you about them. The intention there is to alert you to some possible issues and to be of assistance as you try to complete your report. Grantees should provide a response to those emails and make any corrections to their submitted report if they look into the issues and identify corrections that are needed. And then once you make any corrections and your report is confirmed to be complete, your liaison will accept your report in OLDC. Then your final approved report information is used for the LIHEAP report to Congress. Sometimes later on down the road, you may realize that there is a correction that needs to be made or a change that's needed, and OLDC allows you to submit a revision to your report to be able to update it if you decide a revision is required. So how can you check your report before submitting and avoid needing to go back and make changes? There's a few different tools to help you to be able to do this. The first are the messages that Melissa mentioned earlier, the warning messages you receive in OLDC. If you receive one, we advise you to investigate it and to try to determine if there's an error or not. The second is to compare your report to your prior year report and see if there's any big differences that you wouldn't expect. And then a third is a tool we developed last year as a supplement to the instructions for the household report. It is a checklist document that we call the Check Before You Submit document. There's an example picture of it here, and it asks a series of questions that are based on the validation checks that are performed on your report, and then it provides a response on how you should address those issues if they come up. So the link is there. Again, if you need assistance, you can reach out to one of us to get a copy of it, and we recommend that you take a look at it and provide it to your staff that complete the household report to help them as they work to do that.
So we're going to jump into common reporting issues, and these are really important because these are issues we don't just see with new directors, we see these with very experienced directors. So, you know, Dan mentioned the check before you submit document, but here are the big ones that we see repeatedly. The first, and probably the easiest one to solve, is indicating that the data are final. So when you submitted your preliminary household report in September, many of you clicked the little box that said this data is non-final or estimated, but the final household report has to contain final data. So once all of your data in the report is final, you have to go in and click no in response to the question, do the data below include estimated figures? And then also uncheck any estimated data checkboxes in sections 1 and 4. The second issue we see, and Dan kind of mentioned this, is consistency with your model plan. So if you in your model plan said we're going to provide a particular type of assistance, we would expect to see households reported under that type of assistance in your household report. For example, if you say you're going to do a cooling program, we expect to see cooling households in there, and if we don't, we're going to contact you to say, did you end up not running a cooling program, and you know, to correct that either in your model plan or your household report. We also expect grantees to only report households that fall within the gross income threshold specified in your model plan for each type of assistance. So grantees should assign each household to a poverty interval using the 2017 poverty guidelines, which were in effect at the beginning of FY 2018, and we've put a link here so that you can go back and reference those. If there are any inconsistencies, either in terms of income thresholds or in terms of the kinds of assistance you mentioned you were going to provide in your model plan, you should be adding notes in the household report.
One of the important concepts with reporting information in the household report is reporting an unduplicated count for each data element. So throughout the household report, you're asked to report on households and to report the number of households that receive different assistance and meet different criteria. Throughout the report, you're to count each household once in the category. And I've put a couple examples here on this slide to help us walk through this concept. The first is you may have a household that received multiple benefits for the same type of assistance, such as a household that was in a crisis situation in October, received crisis assistance, and had another crisis situation later on in February and received crisis assistance again. Even though that household received that crisis assistance twice, you would only count the household once when you're reporting the count of households that received crisis assistance. A second example is you might have a household that received more than one type of assistance. So a household, for example, that received heating assistance and that received crisis assistance. In the household report, you would count that household once in the heating assistance counts and once in the crisis assistance counts. And then the last example is there are two fields on the household report that ask you to report the number of households across different types of assistance. One field is the bill payment assistance field, and that is asking you to report the count of households that received assistance to help pay a share of their energy costs. And then there is the any type of LIHEAP assistance, which is asking you to report an unduplicated count of households that got any type of LIHEAP assistance that you provide.
So this is one we see a lot, even among experienced coordinators. I mentioned earlier that many grantees have sub-grantees or partners that use different IT systems, and so you may not be directly capturing information about weatherization or crisis assistance with your primary LIHEAP data. In this situation, grantees do need to obtain household level data from their sub-grantees or program partners. We see a lot of states who ask for basically a copy of the household report from each of their subgrantees or their weatherization partners, and this doesn't allow you to unduplicate households with whoever gets energy assistance. So it's very important for you to get, we call it raw data, but to get household level data from those subgrantees or other state departments in order for you to be able to calculate and report the count of households that received any type of LIHEAP assistance. Now, we've created a number of templates for states that they can use to just hand to their partners and say, here's the data I need. And so if you're interested in these, or if you have questions, or even want us to talk with your partners, we can do all of that, and I encourage you to contact APPRISE so we can help you with that.
Now we're going to do some final reminders. As I said in the beginning of the webinar, right now HHS is awaiting OMB approval for the household report renewal. Once the form is approved by the Office of Management and Budget, HHS will publish an action transmittal that has the final due date for your final household report, and that includes the instructions for accessing the form in the online data collection system. Grantees are encouraged to prepare their final data in anticipation of that approval of the form. And there are no changes to the 2018 household report from last year's 2017 household report. This slide is really helpful to guide you towards resources that can be of assistance. There's the link again to the Check Before You Submit tool. Below that are the household report detailed instructions. And at the very bottom is a link to the data warehouse, which has your state's data all the way back to fiscal year 2001.
So there are lots of challenges, especially if you're a new director, with accessing and using OLDC. We have the login here and just the help desk and phone numbers, and we encourage you to call them up if you're running into issues. One thing that we always tell people is that if you haven't logged on in a while, get yourself in there, and if you have to change your login or your password or whatever, get that taken care of. Don't wait till the last minute to do that, so that you're ready to report when it's time. There are lots of resources available for you to contact, and I say this every year, don't sit at your desk and bang your head against the wall or the cubicle wall or whatever, wherever you are. Give us a call, because chances are we've helped other states through this or through your question, and we can help you get through getting this done pretty quickly. And so don't hesitate to call your liaison, but also any of us on the APPRISE team will be willing to help. And if we can't help you, we'll get you together with someone who can.
All right, we're going to go through some questions. Again, if you have a question, you can always email it to us, and we'll work to address your question. We have one question related to OLDC, what it stands for. It does stand for Online Data Collection, and the previous slide shows you how to access it. If you need any assistance with that, please reach out to us. Another question is, are all the items in the household report required? There is one section in the household report that's optional, and that section lets you optionally report on the number of households that you assisted that have a child 2 years or under, or have a child ages 3 to 5. All the other sections in the household report are required, and they ask about households served and households that applied for assistance. We have another question here. It's a struggle to sometimes get the data from my subgrantees and to combine it to produce the statistics. Are there resources that can help? That is something that we hear from different grantees, and we do provide assistance with that. Melissa and I are happy to have a conversation to help make that process easier, and would encourage you, if you're in that situation, to reach out to us. All right, so that looks like all the time we have for today. So if you do have any other questions, please reach out to us. And on behalf of Melissa and Holly and the LIHEAP team at OCS, we thank you for attending the webinar today.